Republican Congressman from Texas, Pat Fallon, sits on that committee, I should say, and he joins me now. Congressman, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Martha.
You know what I find very interesting? We've been following Dan Goldman, New York Democrat Congressman.
Yeah, Democrat.
And he has gone, leaned very far in order to support the idea that Joe Biden wasn't involved in any of this, that it was all above board. But interestingly, we played yesterday that Devin Archer said, when he was talking about the phone calls, where he also said that Biden came on and talked about the weather,
right.
He said they were calls about the weather, and that was signal enough to be powerful. It was simply his presence that was significant at these events. What do you say?
Well, first of all, I don't think Joe Biden has a degree in meteorology, so I think that's a little bit silly to say. Clearly, when you look at, first of all, he built a firewall in 2019 to the American people, and he said, I have no idea what my son is doing. Then he was in a debate with President Trump, and he said, I know my son didn't do business with China. If you didn't have any idea what your son was doing, how would you know for certain that he was doing business with China or wasn't? And of course, we found out that it was a lie. Hunter was doing business with China, and it was also a lie that Joe Biden had dozens, if not scores, of meetings and interactions with Hunter and his business associates. And
you would think he would realize that, this can all come out. It might be better to get out in front of it and say, of course, there were times when I said hi to people or shook their hands.
Right.
I wasn't involved in any of this. That might have been, in retrospect, a wiser way to go. Let's pull this up, because I think this email chain and chain of events really explains some of this as well. In April of 2014, Hunter wrote an email to Archer. The announcement of my guy, who he seems to refer to as his father in many of these exchanges, of his upcoming travel should be characterized as part of our advice and thinking. But what he will say and do is out of our hands. Then 2 days later, the vice president meets with Hunter and Archer at the White House. A few days later, on the 21st, he goes to Ukraine. And we all remember what happened there when he basically said, we're going to get rid of this guy, Shokin, who was investigating Burisma. And then shortly after that, April 22nd and May 12, Burisma decides to bring both Archer and Hunter onto the board at $83,000 each a month.
yes. So you have Zlochevsky, who is the head of Burisma.
Right.
And then Obama appoints a fellow named Jeffrey Pyatt to be the American ambassador to Ukraine. He gives a speech in Odessa, Ukraine, talking about corruption, because it's rampant in Ukraine, as we know. And he said, one of the poster children is Zlochevsky, right? And then Viktor Shokin, who is the prosecutor, seizes 4 homes of Zlochevsky, 2 plots of land, and a Rolls Royce. But Joe Biden goes to Ukraine and says, you have to fire Viktor Shokin, who's investigating the guy that runs my son's company. He's on the board. That in and of itself smacks of corruption. And I'm going to withhold $1 billion worth of aid unless you fire Viktor Shokin, which they did. And then he released $1 billion of aid. Now, you couple that with reading the FBI 1023 report about their very reliable confidential informant who says Zlochevsky called him and said, don't worry, all this investigation on me will go away because Hunter Biden is on my board. If you take that at face value, and I do, because the FBI themselves have said the 1023 was from a highly reliable informant that has always checked out, all the information he's ever given us is checked out, and we've been working with him for 10 years, and we've given him hundreds of thousands of dollars for that information. So you tell me, Martha, what does that sound like?
And I always think of it also in terms of the first kind of bite at this apple, which was Tony Bobulinski, who came forward and just said, he was there. I met him several times in these exchanges. And let me ask you one last question. And you tell me, if I'm putting this together correctly. So U.S. aid is obviously funded by U.S. taxpayers. So the vice president goes to Ukraine and says, I'm going to withhold this aid, right, which Congress has approved. Right, to go to Ukraine, to spend U.S. taxpayer dollars for this purpose. If you can show a link, and I know the Oversight Committee is putting all of this together, that says that he made a decision based not on what had been appropriated by Congress, but on pressure that was coming towards him from his son as an international lobbyist and his colleagues, is that potentially a violation of law?
There's so many potential violations of law because, as you just said, Congress appropriated that money, and he was saying basically when you withhold, he's dragging his feet. Interestingly enough, Tony Bobulinski. Tony called Joe Biden the big guy, but so did Zlochevsky. Zlochevsky in the 1023 called him the big guy. I think that's a bit too coincidental not to be accurate and true.
Yeah, I think, and also it appears that Devin and Hunter Biden appeared to him that way in these emails as well. My guy, the big guy, the person who won't be named, like,
And
like Harry Potter.
And buying burner phones. If you're doing legitimate business, why do you have to buy burner phones?
It's stunning. I know you guys are digging into this. We're following it all. We'll keep reporting on it as it comes. Representative Fallon, thank you. Good to see you from Texas in New York today. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. You too.